It's always fun figuring out the logistics of these systems with little children. Good morning. I am thrilled to be here. You know, Easter is, quite honestly, the highest point of my year. It is my favorite event. And it's not spring plus. It's not this celebration of, yay, winter's over. So many times that's what we reduce it to, chocolate and bunnies and spring, and it's tragic. So today we're going to talk about a little bit about what makes Easter so fantastic. And we're kind of, as we hit Easter, we're talking about what it means to see Jesus. And going forward, we'll talk about seeing Jesus in the community that he created. But this ends our segment of it where we talk about seeing Jesus for who he is in his earthly life. And as we turn to Easter this year, I reflect on this last year. And we've all suffered a loss. It may be someone you love. It may be employment or relationships or health or freedom. You know, few people are actually doing really well right now, and many are struggling to hide the fact that they're just managing to get by day to day. Analysts and officials are raising alerts and concerns about variants and vaccines, lockdowns, and the impact of it. And at the forefront of what drives these circumstances that we're facing is something that I've called pandemic fatigue. Where we're just tired. We're just tired of complying with the restrictions and the open and close and open. Like, what's happening next? I can't tell you how many times I've heard it. I don't want to be here. I don't like these circumstances. I want things to go back to normal. Why do we have to live this way? This is wrong. I want to see my family. I want to visit my hometown. I want to spend time with my friends. I miss them. I don't even know how they're doing. You know, I've encountered these words so many times in this last year. And they've been on the lips of my family, my friends, my neighbors, my church. But these same words were on the lips of the nation of Israel in their history at many points. Several times where their lives were turned upside down by circumstances outside of their control. And during the time of Jesus, they had to navigate family, relationships, employment, and grief, all couched in this sense of oppression, loss of freedom, and the constant reminder that their lives were at the whims of rulers. And they wanted it over. They wanted to go back to the time of freedom and autonomy. They didn't want it to go back to their normal life. And like us, they were tired of the restrictions, the limitations, and the rules that they had to live under that they didn't agree with. They were tired of feeling that they had no freedom and no hope. And in each gospel, the narratives demonstrates not only the depth of the Roman oppression, but also conveys Jesus' response to those circumstances in the form of an unusual gift. So this week we're going to talk about how Jesus is the gift. So the gift from God here has three parts: the healthy response, his presence in circumstances, and that he shares his hope with us. So first, the healthy response. God communicates that the healthy response to stressful times and troubling times. If you've been with us, we've just finished our series of the Sermon on the Mount. We called it the Upside Down Kingdom. And it's where we talk about God's model of a healthy response emotionally, spiritually, physically, to a life of sin and suffering and pain. Do to others as you would have them do to you. We call it the golden rule. To seek the good of those around you, because the underlying truth of it is that we rise together. No one's life is independent of another person's. And Jesus warns the people about the danger of listening to what they want to hear or what justifies their actions, and speaks to the danger of confirmation bias. You know, in Revelation, he says, let he who has ears, let him listen. He's warning, don't just listen to what supports your own perspective. Question what you're hearing and the narrative that you're being given. And he warns them and tells people that not to hear just what they want to hear. And we're not unique to this, nor were they. From the time of Isaiah and Jeremiah, the time of the judges, all the way through, this warning of the Bible is consistent. And even Jesus had an exchange in Matthew 16 with his disciples, and he said, they were sitting down, and Jesus said, you guys, you got to know I'm going to have to die. And Jesus refused to accept their misplaced wishful thinking when Peter said, oh, Lord, surely not. Like, there's no way that's going to happen. And he rebuked Peter rather forcefully, and Jesus instead fixed his eyes on what God wanted and how he could surrender his rights as a gift for the benefit of others. His rights as a gift for others. In fact, he willingly went to Jerusalem knowing that he was facing betrayal, beatings, crucifixion on a cross, and death. Jesus is our example of what seeking the good of others can lead to. Isaiah foresaw it when he penned the words, by his wounds we are healed, by his stripes we are healed. We all have been like sheep scattered astray, Isaiah 53. You see, the death of Jesus paid the price for our freedom. And we get to come to God, not with a cost to us, but because he did it to seek the good of others at a cost to him. That concept of vicarious payment. And so part of God's gift is that instead of our rights, we get to take up that mantle of vicariousness. And we get to focus on how we can help the situation. So instead of arguing about how real or dangerous or not these times are, or struggling with the lie that we have no impact on how this situation is going to play out, God prods people to not focus on what they want to think and hear, but to focus on what they can do to help others. Even as he was preparing to be crucified in the last few hours, Luke chapter 22, he says to Peter, they said, oh, none of us. Jesus says, I'm going to go to be crucified and you'll all flee. And Peter says, no, I wouldn't do that. I love Peter. And Jesus looks at him and he goes, oh, Peter, I know where this is going. But I've prayed that your faith in me would not fail, but that you would strengthen your brothers, strengthen the others. Luke 22, verse 32. And so, like Peter, just like the same pattern of vicariousness, we have the privilege and the choice to limit ourselves. It's not about fear or blind obedience. It's about acting to protect those most vulnerable. You've heard it said, we are all in this together. I've seen it on so many business windows and cars. We are all in this together. And yes, we are. We are all in this together. We're all in this same storm. The problem is that some of us are on cruise ships. Some of us are in rowboats and yachts, and some of us are treading water. Jesus calls us to meet those more vulnerable with compassion. Recognize that your well-being impacts the well-being of your community. Your health and mine are linked. And so we get to seek the good of those around us, sometimes at our cost. So the healthy response means be part of the solution, not part of the problem. Because we're all impacted. We fall together, we rise together. But where is God in this mess? We talk about his presence in every circumstance, but where is God? Where is God in the midst of this suffering? I get asked this so much. How can he let this happen? Where is he? One of those times where Israel was stuck, God spoke through the prophet Jeremiah, chapter 29. Verse 11, he says, for I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper and not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future. And it's just so often taken out of context. But the biblical narrative here places God in the midst of this. In the midst of our pain. In the midst of our suffering. Planning, working, positioning, to bring life from death, hope from despair, light from darkness, joy from sorrow. And he declares that he is at work in the mess to not leave people, but to help them. And so in the time of Jesus, the Easter story, which recounts the historical events of the suffering, death, and resurrection of Jesus, contains many powerful, deep, and fascinating events. and the teachings that speak to God's plan for our hope and a future. But today I'm going to highlight a single event. I'm going to highlight a single event whose significance is usually lost on us. See, at the moment of Jesus' death, 3 out of the 4 gospel writers, we call them the synoptic gospels, 3 out of the 4 record that in the temple there's this big curtain, and the curtain was torn in 2 from top to bottom. Matthew says at that moment the curtain of the temple was torn in 2 from top to bottom. The earth shook, the rocks split. Mark says the curtain of the temple was torn in 2 from top to bottom, and Luke says for the sun stopped shining and the curtain of the temple was torn in 2. That temple, that's the one that he's talking about. So, this curtain being torn, why is that significant? Why does that matter? It's just a curtain, right? Well, it's very significant, this curtain or veil, because when Israel was brought out of Egypt and they came to the mountain in Exodus, they feared direct contact with God. And they were like, no, we can't hear his voice. They're just terrified. They're like, no, just talk through Moses. Just a little further away. You talk to Moses talk, then we're good. So they begged for the mediator, and God conceded to that. But the problem is when Moses would meet with God, his face would glow, and it freaked the people out. So he started wearing a veil because it was just too present. So they needed the veil to separate the holiness of God from their life. Just like they needed Moses to separate the holiness of God, the presence of God, from their life. And so, but also when Moses went in the tent, the pillar of cloud by day, or cloud by day and fire by night, that pillar would descend upon the tent where he was meeting, and the tent would glow. And so they would hang a large veil over the front of the tent to keep the light from going, so they wouldn't have to be encountering the presence of God too directly. And so that veil was meant to insulate them from the presence of God. And later when the temple was built, there was these intricate details about how this veil, in Exodus 26, about how this veil is supposed to be made. And I'm not going to get into that. And in every recreation of the temple and the tabernacle, this veil remained. And it wasn't a veil because God wanted to keep people away. It's because people wanted to keep God away. It was all out of a fear of what a holy God, a pure God, a perfect God would do to a dirty, sinful, imperfect person. And so the veil described first and most fully in description in the tabernacle was made out of like blue and purple and scarlet yarn. And it was finely twisted linens with images embedded in it, worked into it by craftsmen, it says. And it was Exodus 26 and 36. And it was hung separating the holy place where the priests would go and the most holy place where the glow of God's presence would be found. And it was hung by these golden hooks on an Assai wood frame, which itself was laid over with gold. So it's very intricate. And the Ark of the Covenant, God's mobile temple, God's presence with the people as they traveled, that covenant was behind the veil. And so as much as the veil was man's effort to insulate themselves from God's presence, the problem was it worked too well. We hung the curtain, and we wanted to feel safe in our faith. Not enough God to be dangerous, but enough of him to have faith. Not enough God to confront ourselves, but enough of God to help us live better. And it's based on the assumption that God is neither good nor safe. He's not going to be kind enough to us, and that he's not safe enough. That he would deal with wrongdoings the way the Egyptians would have. That he would deal with the wrongdoings the way we would, a call for punishment. And how many times do we see Jesus encountering sin in the New Testament? And what is the answer of the people? What is the answer of the people when they felt that Jesus had done wrong? They cried out all the more loudly, "Crucify him." They wanted to stone the woman in Matthew chapter 8. You see, the thing is, God has never been a safe God. And here his gift is the answer to our need for safe. Enough that the veil that hides us from perceiving God needs to go. And so when we look at this picture of the temple, interestingly, when we think about church, we humans, we people, tend to recreate this temple in our lives and in our hearts and in our churches. You had the outer courts where the Gentiles were. Then you had the foyer, the entrance area. That's where the women were allowed. Sorry, you're allowed in the church now. Then you had the court of the men, where the men were allowed. But then you had this, and that's where the congregation is. That's where everyone gathered. But then you had this separated area where only the priests, those serving, those doing something special, were permitted to be. And that was the holy place. And then in some churches, you'll notice they have the communion. They keep it in a little box at the back of the church. And they open that only at time of communion, because they're going to open that to pull out the Holy of Holies, the host, the presence of God for the people. And they open it and they bring out communion. And they celebrate communion and they put it back in. And it's a holy space. It's the most holy space in front of the holy place, in front of the gathering place, in front of the entrance. And if you stand at the door, you can look all the way in and see the door to the most holy place. It's crazy. We keep recreating steps to separate us from God. So that veil, that curtain that keeps us away from God. And he says, no, it's got to go. And so when Jesus breathed his last, this temple, this one, where a Gentile could stand outside the courts and see in the distance, just over a football field of length, he could see that purple and blue and scarlet curtain with gold hanging. At the moment of his death, that curtain ripped, revealing the very presence of God to all people. You can't tear a curtain from the top or from the bottom, you know that? I've tried it, it's embarrassing. You try to rip a curtain from the bottom, you get about 2/3 of the way up, it stops ripping. Eventually, if you try to get it done, you rip the whole thing down. You can't fully separate it. It's actually impossible. If the amount of force required is just insane. This act of tearing the curtain in two, from top to bottom, could only be accomplished by God. Could only be done by God. And so what is the message from God in the death of Jesus? My desire is that you would have unhindered access and presence to God in your life. Because it was us who hung the curtain, and it was him who tore it. Sorry, old King James. You see, Jesus who died to pave the way for us to be close to God. Jesus whose body was torn just like the curtain. Jesus who gave us a way into the very heart of God. That Jesus. The Jesus who became our living path to intimacy with God. I mean, don't get me started on the significance that Jesus is the temple and that his torn flesh is the curtain that reveals God's heart. I'd love to dive into that, but we can't. What God is saying is that he wants us all to find hope and strength in the promise that he makes a purpose beyond our circumstances. Whether it's a stroke or divorce or COVID or unemployment or mental health struggles or just feeling alone and detached, God's love and kindness is on you. He desires to bring purpose to your life. And foremost is that he might delight in you and you delight in him. And so he says, I am done with having things coming between me and you. It is time to put those things away. And so in that same passage of Jeremiah that I referenced earlier, the next verse, he says, then you will call on me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me, and you will find me. When you seek me with your whole heart, I will be found by you. His deepest longing has always been for that kind of intimacy. And he wants us to partner with him in building that kind of intimacy and future for everyone. The gift of participation means that we rise together because God is present in every circumstance to bring hope and life. You never know when your struggle, your troubles will bring hope and life to others. Because we know, again, vicariously, that the struggles and pain in the life of Jesus brings us life and purpose and hope. So the third point, he shares his hope with us. Yes, God hopes. His purposes extend beyond our immediate health and well-being into this deep desire to connect. The torn curtain is the invitation and the precursor here. You see, miracles were traditionally seen as evidence that God approved of the message and the messenger. That he was present with the messenger, he was pleased with the message, and then he'd bless the messenger in some way. And we're reminded vaguely of Elijah and Enoch. And, we think about Old Testament prophets who God did wondrous things through, and he was pleased with their message. It was evidence of it. It vindicated their life. So if Jesus was, to borrow from C.S. Lewis, a liar or a madman, God would not raise him. A madman that gets himself killed stays in the grave. But here's the thing. If God raised Jesus, then he validates the things that Jesus taught, did, and lived. And the problem is Jesus made some immense and crazy claims for anybody to make. I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. I have come that they might have life, and life in their fullest, that in him is eternal life. Before Abraham was, I am. That where he is going, he'll prepare a place for us to join him. These kinds of claims are only the claims that God could make. And to make them makes you either a lunatic, a deceiver, or it makes you into the only thing that Jesus could be if God raised him. True. Lord. And so, cue the cross. And the grave. And that Saturday of silence where everybody wondered, is this the end? Yet the Easter narrative tells us that Jesus, after 3 days, emerged from darkness, from death, from oppression, vindicated in his message. And here he continues to be our model and is the first to have victory over what he promised us to have victory in. Death will come, but it shall not win. It doesn't have the final say in who you are or what you're worth. And in the coming weeks, we'll continue to see how Jesus extends his life, his power, and his authority to us as we see him in the community he created and how we share in that victory over death. But for now, let me say this. His gift to us, now that the curtain is torn, now that we are freed from death and payment of sin, his gift is the invitation to a life of significance, meaning, and purpose. He invites you to participate in the same life that is in him. And this has always been his heart, and it always will be. In the last book of the Bible, Revelations, chapter 21, verse 3-5, God proclaims his end goal in a loud voice from the throne, saying, "Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither there shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain, for the former things have passed away." God desires to be part of your life now and always. And his promise is that you shall one day live together, free, where loss and grief and pain and suffering and death and poverty hold no power. On the other side of the grave, he promises we shall rise and be together. And the hope that he shares with us is the hope that I share with you now. I hope to see you there. Because there we shall fully grasp the depth and meaning of what it says to say, we rise together. This time, for the last time, to eternal life. And so if you're hearing these words and you don't know Jesus, the invitation is before you. Come and be known. God wants you to know life and freedom, a hope beyond COVID, beyond illness, beyond death, a life filled with purpose and love and kindness from God. So to sum up, first, the healthy response. Seek the good of others. Be part of the solution, not part of the problem. Second, his presence is in every circumstance. God is near you and wants to draw near. Remove the veil. And third, he shares his hope with us that beyond our current circumstances, he wishes that we should all rise together. And so God's gift is simple. We rise together. Please close your eyes and pray with me as we close. God, I know that life is a mess right now, and I've played my part. I don't want this mess to continue. I am holding on to your promise that there is life, there's more to life than these circumstances. I know your desire. I know your desire is to embrace me in life. Help me to connect with who you meant me to be and to follow in relationship with you, because you desire that we do rise together. Amen. If you pray this for the first time, please click the link in the chat for those of you who are online. And if you're here in person, please come speak with someone about this. I invite you to reach out. Community is at the heart of God's desire for all people. Thank you. And as always, go in grace.